Throughout the Second World War, Allied pilots reported hundreds of strange encounters in the skies with things that they couldn't explain. Everything from unexplained lights to unexplained craft to other anomalies. Today we're looking specifically at the story of a man named Edward Schluter. Edward was a pilot in the Royal Air Force of Britain, otherwise known as the RAF. Ed served throughout the duration of the war, but one of his most notable experiences occurred in the skies over Germany in November of 1944. By this point in the war, things had turned in favor of the Allies. Germany was in retreat, the Allies had moved across France and were now threatening Germany. Ed and pilots like him had begun flying reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines into German territory. On one particular night in November, he flew one of these missions. His goal was to fly behind the enemy lines to a particular waypoint in German territory, gather as much reconnaissance as he could, and then return back to the base in France. Ed took off with two other men, one of which was a reconnaissance officer, the other was a radar technician. They did not have any other planes flying with them. This would be a solo act. They wanted to keep a low profile in hopes of avoiding any German attention. So the men flew into German territory, and for the first part of the mission, all was going well. They encountered no resistance, no German fighters in the sky, and no fire from the ground troops. About 20 minutes after crossing the border into Germany, things began to get strange. Ed looked up from his controls, and he saw what he described as 8 to 10 bright orange lights off the left side of the craft, essentially at a 10 o'clock position, and they were moving toward him at a high rate of speed, a speed which he noted was faster than any known aircraft could have achieved. Obviously, Ed was startled by this. He got on his intercom to talk to his radar technician. He said, "Look, this is what I have. There's 8 to 10 bright orange lights at a 10 o'clock position just over the horizon. I don't know what they are. Do you see them on the radar?" After a short pause, he received a response. The radar technician said, "No, there's nothing on the radar. As far as I can see, we should be the only craft in the sky for miles." Ed wasn't particularly concerned just yet, because this onboard radar technology was relatively new. Ground technology for radar was much more advanced by this point. So he got on his radio to communicate back to base and explain the same thing to them. "I've got 8 to 10 bright orange lights. They're moving toward me at a very high rate of speed. Can you tell me what you see on your radar?" There was another pause, and the ground team confirmed there's nothing on radar. Whatever you're seeing in the sky, we're not picking it up on radar. Now, Ed knew by this point the radar was relatively reliable, and if it's not being picked up on radar, there's something very strange going on here. By this point, the lights were becoming closer and closer and closer to Ed's craft. He had a very important decision to make. Was he going to engage with whatever this craft or crafts were that were flying towards him so fast? Now, he didn't know if this was enemy fighters, that a new kind of fighter that could move extremely quickly. He didn't know if this was some sort of anti-aircraft technology that had targeted him. But he did know that if he started to fire the machine guns that were on board of his craft, any Germans on the ground would hear it and see it and know exactly where he was. Ed decided that was too risky. He decided to not engage unless he had absolutely no other choice. And so he waited, and he saw the craft coming closer and closer and closer, knowing that there was very little that he could do to avoid whatever was about to happen next. Fortunately for Ed and his team, he watched as these 8 lights, 10 lights moved extremely fast across the front of their craft. They watched as they went off into the distance, covering miles in what seemed to be only seconds. Ed was completely confused by this. He knew German fighters well. He had encountered them all throughout the war. He knew what their capabilities were, and whatever this was not something he had ever seen before. Ed was a professional. And he knew that investigating these lights, however confusing, however interesting they were, that was not his job, and that was not what he was there to do. He continued on his way toward the waypoint where he would finally be allowed to turn around and head back to France, where he would be safe. He tried to put the strange experience out of his mind, but obviously it bothered him tremendously. Another 10 minutes goes by. Ed is starting to feel a bit more comfortable. Whatever that was, it was strange, but it's gone now. I can focus on the task at hand. However, Ed looked up again from his controls, and what he saw made his jaw drop. He saw, dead ahead, just over the horizon, those same 8 to 10 lights. The same color, the same brightness. Only this time, those lights were not moving. They were simply hovering just over the horizon. Ed was terrified. He didn't know how they got there. They were moving hundreds of miles an hour in the opposite direction and had somehow covered enormous ground without him noticing, without anyone on his team, especially his radar operator, noticing that they somehow got tens of miles now ahead of him. What's more, and Ed could not account for this feeling, but he had a feeling in his gut that these lights were watching him, that they knew he was there, that they were interested in him, and that they were watching him. He stared, completely transfixed by these lights. He had no idea what to do. He knew that trying to engage them was probably going to be a mistake. They would be too fast. Whatever technology this was, he was completely outmatched by it. So he continued on course, watching these lights. After only a few minutes, just like somebody turned a light switch, the lights went out. They didn't slowly dim, they didn't float back to the ground, they didn't shoot off like they had before. It was simply that 1 second they were on and the next they were off. Now back at this time, there were really no craft that had the ability to hover like that. Zeppelins were one such craft that could, but obviously Zeppelins move extremely slow and are extremely large. It would be very obvious if these were Zeppelins. Today we have helicopters and drones and Harriers and all sorts of different craft that can hover in the air, but in 1944 these just did not exist, or the technology was in its infancy. Ed survived that night, although very shaken. He made it back to France, and for a long time, other than his officers who he reported it to, he kept these experiences to himself. What Ed did not know was that he was not the first individual to encounter these craft, and he absolutely would not be the last. The other men on board Ed's plane that night were just as confused by the experience as he was. They had no idea what to make of these strange lights that they saw in the sky, the same lights that did not show up on the radar. His radar operator nicknamed the craft Foo Fighters, which was essentially a nonsense word that was used in a comic strip that was popular at the time. Hundreds of experiences with these so-called Foo Fighters were reported all throughout the war. Many of the characteristics of this experience, as you may have already noticed, bear a tremendous amount of similarities with experiences that Navy pilots have recently shared, specifically the Tic Tac UFO. History is full of strange experiences just like this one. And if there's two things that I love, it's history and spooky stuff. And on this channel, I hope to talk about both of those. Everything from strange lights in the sky to unexplainable mysteries throughout history to local folklore and everything in between. So if that's something that interests you, please take a second to subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. This is something that's new to me, so I'm going to be working to learn as best I can to produce good videos, entertaining videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a good one.